Morning, guys. Dr. Ken Nordberg back again with another fireside hunting seminar. It was up to into the 50s here yesterday, and all the snow we've accumulated this winter is fast melting. Before you know it, we'll have to be out there in the yard pretty soon getting things cleaned up, but kind of nice to finally get to this point in the year. Anyway, today I've got another, what I consider an exciting new seminar about hunting deer where global warming has had an effect, and in areas where large numbers of wolves have had an effect on our deer. And basically, one of the basic problems everywhere is where global warming is affecting our whitetails is that they've not only it's changed some of their habits, which made them predictable for us stand hunters. You know, that was the bread and butter of stand hunting, having predictable areas to hunt deer during predictable hours. Well, those predictable things are gone now where we hunt. If you haven't noticed it, but you probably have, but if you haven't noticed it, those kind of things are happening where you hunt as well. When you have abnormally warm weather during fall hunting seasons, by that time your deer have got their winter coats on. They've grown their new winter coats. You know, they're tan now instead of red, and it's thicker, and the underfur is like cotton, and it keeps them warm. And up here in Minnesota, our deer grow winter fur that keeps them warm down to 45 degrees below zero. That's got to be some pretty warm fur. So in our area, if the temperature rises above 50 degrees during the hunting season, those deer don't want to move. It's just too darn hot for them with that winter fur on. And so they'll just lay out there in the woods in the shade somewhere and not move, not eat, not drink water until it's dark and it gets cool enough for them to move around more comfortably. So basically what we're dealing with, for one thing, this is probably the thing that bothers most of us the most, is that most of our deer are becoming nocturnal, and so we're not seeing near as many of them. And the smarter deer are the ones that are worse, like the older bucks. And some older does too. Some of those does are pretty smart. They live longer than bucks, and they have more experience at avoiding wolves and human hunters than all the other deer living in the woods. And so they can be really smart about how to do that as well. But at any rate, the basic problem is we got nocturnal deer. And you can sit in a stand all day and you don't do a thing to change matters. Those nocturnal deer will just keep laying in their beds all day and you hardly see any deer. And through the day, at night, you can be driving to town or whatever, and you have dinner in the evening or something, and you see them all over the place, in the ditches and out in the fields, and here's all these big bucks out there, but in the daytime, nothing. And that's disgusting. So what I've done here, after 3 years of going through this, now we've had this going on for 3 years now, we've developed ways to make nocturnal deer move during daylight hours. And the basic tactic that makes them move is what people who make drives, deer drives to take deer. And those big deer drives, if they're well put together and done well, can produce a lot of deer. You can take a lot of deer that way. My first 15 years of whitetail hunting was spent making drives only, from morning till night, every day. And a lot of times we'd fill out, there'd be 11, 12 of us in the group, neighbors and family members. We'd have our 11 or 12 deer by the third day. Sometime, I remember one year by Sunday noon we had our 12 deer. It can be a pretty good way to hunt whitetails, but the problem was, what I didn't like about it at all, was that we hardly ever got a big buck. In 15 years, we only took one buck that we felt like was qualified to be mounted and put on the wall. Only one in 15 years. All these guys, 10, 11, 12 guys, and only one trophy class buck. And I hated that because right from the beginning when I was 10 years old. I started out at age 10. I wanted to get a big buck. And it just bothered me. I'd read all the magazines and read all about how to do it. And it was, finally, after 15 years, I told my father, I said, we're never going to get any decent bucks hunting that way. I said, I've been reading in these outdoor magazines, these guys over in Wisconsin, they call themselves stump sitters. Look at the picture of the nice big bucks got them. There's 6 guys and they got 6 really nice bucks hanging up on this pole. I said, we got to try that. So we decided to leave the gang, much to the disgust of most of the guys in the gang, and go off hunting on our own. Then we became stump sitters, well, log sitters, and we started taking bucks. Well, everything was really great until the year of 2019, when wolves and global warming really started to mess things up where we hunt. And we had a lot fewer deer, a lot fewer older bucks, and their habits are terrible. They hardly ever move during the daytime, except maybe a few times under certain circumstances, which we'll be talking about in the future. I mean, you can key on certain weather that triggers some daylight feeding and the first and last shooting hours of the day in certain places. We're going to talk about that. But one of the things I was thinking when we started having all this trouble, I said, we can't make whitetails move sitting in a tree or on the ground blind over there. You can sit there all day and not see a deer, in which we were doing. So we got to do something to make deer move, and I kept thinking of the old days when we used to make drives, and it didn't matter what kind of weather we had. It could be raining and snowing, it can be warm, really cold, 20 below. We'd make deer move anyway. They would move, and because they were moving, we'd see them. But it kind of depended on, there were several guys in our group that were really good at shooting deer that were running as fast as they could go through the woods, and I was never good at that. I did get deer. I took 3, the first year I was 10 years old, I got 3 deer. But it's really a hard way to hunt that way, and you don't get any bucks, and worse yet, wherever you make a drive, there won't be any deer in that area for the rest of the hunting season. So you keep doing that, and pretty soon, depending on how large an area you have to hunt in, we were hunting on state land around my uncle's farm. So we had endless land, so we could make drives every day for 2 weeks if we wanted to. But at any rate, wherever we made a drive, you could go there anytime during the following week and not a deer on there, just bare, no tracks, no droppings, nothing. And that aggressive kind of hunting is really hard on future hunting in the area. So those are 2 of the bad characteristics of deer drives. And I thought if we could only move deer like we do when we're making a drive, but do it in a way that doesn't force those deer to abandon their ranges, not only will we be able to do this day after day in a limited area, but we'll get some bucks. And so, years ago we started developing new hunting methods. So I started 30 years ago, new stand hunting methods that were better and better. And those stand hunting methods enabled my 3 sons and I to take 4 mature bucks a year on the average, year after year after year for 30 years. And they were really good stand hunting methods. Well, so what I had in mind is to combine the best of those stand hunting methods with deer drive tactics. And the best way to keep those deer drive tactics from making deer abandon their range is to do it very slowly. Do it in a way that doesn't make them run or raise their tails and bound away. You don't want that. You use those deer drive tactics slowly enough to keep deer from raising their tails and bounding away as fast as possible. So what we're going to do, what I wanted to do is combine deer drive tactics with the best of our stand hunting methods that we developed over the years, using drive tactics slowly enough, not going through 1.5 miles and chasing all kinds of deer towards some standers downwind. Instead of doing that, we would go slowly enough toward these deer, so they didn't feel inclined to have to raise their tails and bound away. In which case, if they were big bucks when they do that, they're gone for the season. We didn't want that to happen. We're still big buck hunters. My family and my boys and the rest of our gang have grown up going through all these years in deer hunting, getting used to the fact that we only hunt mature bucks. That's it. No does, no, hardly ever a yearling. I let my grandsons during their early years of hunting take a yearling buck. But other than that, we kind of ignore them when we're hunting. But so we're used to that, and we've been very good at it. Well, so what we've come up with is some brand new hunting methods. They're kind of hybrids of new and old hunting methods that make deer move. And that's the only way we're going to get to be able to harvest nocturnal deer. You got to make them move. They got to get up and move from place to place. And that's what these new hunting methods do. Now, many years ago, back in the 1960s, my brother was alive. Then he died accidentally in 1972. But he was just such a good hunting partner, and he and I always hunted together. But we had an area in Aiken County where there was a 30-acre spruce bog. And that spruce bog was a place where, maybe as many as 100 deer wintered. They'd go there in the end of December, and they stay there till snow melt in spring. And that really dense spruce bog protected them from cold, bitter winds, 40 below stuff, during the winter, and from snow. You could lay under these trees, and they were various sizes. Some were 30, 40 feet tall. And so it provided good protection in severe winter weather. And also, all around it, the lowlands around, was just filled with kind of foods they liked, the browse, like mountain maples and red osiers, and there was enough in that area surrounding a big band around it, so that provided all those deer with adequate food to get through the winter. So it was an ideal wintering area. Well, during the summer months, most of those deer were gone, but there was always some deer that lived there all summer long, and some does and young. And back in those days, back in the 60s, we weren't big buck oriented as much as we are today. And there were times when we took does as well as bucks back in those days, and we were happy to do it. But anyway, anytime Bob walked through there, or I walked through that bog, and there was these beautiful trails in there, and there was always some fresh tracks and droppings on those trails, we could go back and forth there, and sometimes you could hear what sounded like deer moving around ahead of you and on the side of you. I remember one time, well, more than once, I did it quite a few times, I could swear I could hear deer over there to the left or the right. And I get down on my hands and knees and look under those trees, the bottom parts, the branches are dead, and you could see a fair distance underneath the trees. But the openings were not high enough to see the body. I'd look down there and I'd see deer legs. I could see deer walking past, or a deer, here's some deer legs there, there's a deer there, standing there looking in my direction. And he can't see me and I can't see the deer, but it can hear me. And there it was, and there was nothing I could do. I couldn't shoot through all that spruce boughs in between us. I couldn't even see them, so there was no chance for that. But it was so frustrating. And one day we were sitting in camp and said, we got to figure out a way to hunt that. Because those deer are there and they don't want to leave. They just keep circling around us when you go through there. There's got to be a way to take deer there. Well, by that time we had learned something, and I learned it while we were all those years making drives, that when you drive with older whites, so that isn't so true of fawns and yearlings, they're kind of dumb about drives, but older deer, especially older bucks, whenever you try to force them to move in one direction, especially downwind, they don't like it at all. And as soon as they get a little safe distance away from you, when you're doing that, I'm making a big drive, here comes 6 guys moving in one direction, long skirmish line like that, they don't like that at all. And bucks had all kinds of ways to escape that. They'd recognize, here comes a drive. But they get a little ways ahead, and the first thing they want to do is go left or right. They didn't want to go forward because they seemed to know if they kept getting pushed forward, they were going to be in big trouble, if there was ambushes ahead, and they didn't want that to happen. So as soon as they get a little ways ahead of us, out of sight usually, they start going right or left, those older deer, especially the older bucks. And a lot of them, they'll just keep going, and they can smell the drivers coming, they're upwind. And when they finally keep going far enough to the left or right, pretty soon can't smell them anymore. Okay, now it's safe. And when it's safe, then they'll start going into the wind, get out of the area. They want to go into the wind so they can smell if there's any ambushes ahead of them. That's the only way they can go and be sure they're not going to run into an ambush, because there's hunters out here and you don't want to run into ambushes. Deer are that smart, they really are. Well, anyway, so Bob and I knew that bucks, well, all the older deer did this. You could be walking through that spruce bog, and pretty soon they'd be going one way or the other in there, and maybe circle back around you, like they were doing that. We knew they were doing that. And so we decided, well, let's do something different. So what we decided to do is go through there together and do it slowly so they didn't run. So that's where I first got the idea. We didn't want them to run. We didn't want them to bound away, because that ruined everything, especially if we had a buck in front of him. So we do it slowly. And what we decided, well, we'll stay about 75 yards apart. We started on the downwind end of the spruce bog one afternoon, and every half hour we'll stop for a half hour. We'll just stop and stand there. We didn't use backpack stools in those days. We just stand there for a half hour and listening and watching, and is there something over there? And, but we figured if we do that, there was a good chance that we would chase deer toward one another. If a deer comes to the left and comes toward me, then I'd have a chance to, and vice versa. If one turned to the right and went out in front of Bob, he'd have a chance. So we did that, and we were about an hour into that first attempt with this new hunting method, and I heard something going in front of me, like we often did when we were out there in this bog, and I was sure it had to be a deer, and it was going from Bob's direction, going in front of me, off toward my left. Then I heard it stop, I was standing there listening, and I was at a time where I was standing there for a half hour, and then it was coming toward me, and it was on a trail that paralleled my trail, and I couldn't see it, but there was a little opening about 5 feet back from where I was standing, backed up, and there was a little opening I could see through between some trees over in that direction, and I had my gun up and cocked and waiting, and there it walked into that little opening, and I saw that, here's the chest, and here's the area behind the chest for a hard shot, and I shot, and down I went. And Bob and I were so pleased with that new hunting method. And we used it every year, once or twice, and I always took a deer out of that spruce bog doing that. It was just such a great way to hunt in a place like that. Other areas we didn't do that, but there in that bog, that spruce bog, that was the only way you could get a deer. Well, he died in 1972, and then in 1990, I moved my family, and we all went up near the Canadian border and started my current study hunting area up there, a 10 square mile area. And I kind of forgot about it because we were so good at that, we didn't need to use any other hunting method. So I forgot that method for a long time until 1990. Well, actually, from last year I started thinking about, that method that Bob and I used, that might be the answer to what we can do. It would be a way of moving nocturnal deer without alarming them enough to make them run out of the area. So we came up with some different ideas. Now, some years ago, one of my earlier Whitetail Hunters Almanacs, I introduced a hunting method that I called mile-a-day still hunting. That was the first, and I got the idea from that method that Bob and I used. And instead of half-hour stops, by that time I had learned that you know, when you go to a stand site and if there's deer in there, you can't see them, but you think they're going to be here, or they're probably here right now, they're close, and if they hear you, but they can't figure out what you are just by the sounds that you make, you know, your footsteps, if you do that right, or they can't figure out, they can't see you, or maybe they just get little glimpses now and then of you moving through the timber, but not enough to tell them that, well, that's a human coming. And then you get to your stand site, and then you sit down, like you sit down on one of our backpack stools, you know, it's just silent, no noise, carrying it, you take it off, you put it silently on the ground, and then you sit down and be silent for the next half hour. It took up to a half hour for this to happen. But when you did that, any deer that were in the area that were wondering what you are would apparently decide you must have kept going and they didn't hear you leave. Because deer can do it, they probably figured anything else, you know, like that can do that as well. So they're not here anymore. Nothing's happened for a half hour, they're gone. So then they start moving around again, start feeding, and then you see them when they're moving around, but before that you don't. So we learned that wherever you stand, you want to get there a half hour early. And like in the morning, the first legal shooting hour starts 1/2 hour before sunrise. And so we always made it a point to get to our stand sites 1 hour before sunrise. So get that half hour out of the way, and so that the very first minute of legal shooting time, if there you see a deer, you can shoot it. You know, it'll be there. That's when they start moving. And I would say, honestly, in the 30 years we did so well deer hunting, at least half of them were taken during that first hour of the day. And probably half of those were taken during that first half hour. And just think of it, if we had missed that half hour every day we hunted in all those 30 years, I'd be saying, instead, well, you didn't take 107 whitetails during that period, we took 85 or something like that, maybe 80 instead of 107, because we'd missed out on that important half hour of the first shooting hour of the day. That is a dynamite times behind, one of the best times, half hours of the day to hunt whitetails, if you're in the right place. And if you're using a mature buck effective stand site, oh, we're going to talk about that a lot too in the future. But at any rate, when we learned that when you're using this technique, you know, a couple guys, or one, even if you do it all by yourself, a mile a day standing, when you get to that stand site, you're going to sit down, you want to be there at least an hour. If you moved every half hour, the number of deer you're likely to see while doing this would be really much lower than if you spend an hour there, because now you got a half hour of deer moving around out there, and they're being affected by other hunters in the group. Like say, here, I've got a spot where we've been hunting whitetails for 32 years. And this area has always been I always thought it was just a dynamite spot to hunt whitetails. We've taken quite a few deer on this piece here. And this is kind of the outline of it. In the middle of it here is an old clear cut right here. That clear cut's growing up. Boy, it's full of trees and brush and grass 6 feet tall. And there could be 1,000 deer laying down in that grass today and you wouldn't see them. It's just like that, you know. But in the early years when that clear cut was new, man, that was really a good feeding area for deer in this area. And we've taken quite a few deer there. But here, everywhere, bedding areas and watering spots, little trails going to, there's a little creek going up here and some couple of beaver ponds. One of the few places, this is not exactly in my study hunting areas, kind of on the edge, but that's one of the few places where there's still water today. We have other places in our hunting area where beaver dams are all dried up. They're not there anymore because the wolves ate all the beavers there. But this still has beavers there. But anyway, there are little trails going off over here to where a deer would go to water, go through the bulrushes and whatnot, but places where they would go. Used to be a pond over here, and they'd go there. That was a big time one too, but that's all dried up now too. But I thought, boy, you know, this area, even though it's really difficult for us to predict where our does are going to be on any one day, because they've made small herds and are moving around a much larger area. You know, this is about the size of a dominant buck's breeding area right here. And used to be, there'd be 4 or 5 home ranges of does in there. Well, and when the does were in heat, they stayed in their home ranges pretty much. It was easy for the buck that owned this square mile area to find them while does were in heat during that 2-week period in November. It was simple. You know, they just go to each doe range, and gee, they could smell that pheromone being released by the doe a mile away. So that's probably one reason that dominant breeding buck home ranges used to be about a square mile in size, because they could go anywhere in there. And, oh, there's one over that way. And if the odors of a real live doe are with that smell coming, well, I know, boy, there's a doe over there in heat night, so you'll go straight to the doe. You can follow the airborne scent right to the doe. So that made it easy for them. But now, these does that live here and over there and over this way, there aren't as many now. There's only 3 deer per square mile there. It used to be 22 deer per square mile in this area years ago. But there's only 3 per square mile now. And the does that are survived and with young, they band together in early fall. Well, by the 1st of November, they've already banded together. And instead of just living in these individual home ranges, which are average about 125 acres, now those surviving deer from an area as large as over 2 square miles in size. I'm not sure about 3, but I know it's over 2. Over those does that remain in that particular area have banded together, form a small herd. And instead of just being on these limited areas like this during the period they're in estrus, they're moving all over this huge area where there used to be does all over, all these square miles out there, and 4 or 5 of them mature does, the yearling does, which are in heat as well during that period. So now they're in small bunches, and every day they move to another spot to feed. They don't feed in the same place twice at all while they're doing this, which makes it, you can't predict what feeding area they're going to be in. That's impossible. So they're moving all around, and these bucks, the ones that are remaining, and there aren't that many of those remaining either, but there are some big dominant breeding bucks in the 4.5 to 6.5 year range living here, and they have to find those does over these huge areas. And so that's what's happening. But just the same, those got to be somewhere, those herds, and attracting bucks while breeding is going somewhere in that 10 square mile. And there are places that for years and years and years were always really dependable, good places to find those deer. Good feeding area and water. Right now, that's an important thing. This is one of the few places left in that square mile where they can go to water every day and find water there. And during the heat of the day, when it's really hot, they're going to drink water more often. So that means a lot of those nocturnal deer are going to be on the move during the day just to go and get water. So that means, they aren't going to want to travel far when in the heat of the day. So where are they going to be banging down? Somewhere along this edge here, in the timber, where it's shady. So they're going to be in here. And it's within an easy walk over to get water when they get really thirsty. So that has got to be a place where maybe there's no deer in there today, but tomorrow there may be. But I think there's, this is a place where we're more than likely than a lot of places to find deer on any one day. So this is a place, one of the first places I thought of trying this new hunting method. Well, not so new, but new now the way we're doing it, combined with deer drive tactics. One of the first places I thought of for trying that out, and I'll show you what I'm planning, what we're going to do. This is typical what we'll probably do. We'll get all the guys together and we'll talk about this tomorrow morning. We're gonna do a mile-a-day stand hunt in this section over here. And we're gonna go in on this trail. You know, this thing is facing east, that's west over there, and it's east over this way, and south that way, and north this way. But anyway, we're gonna go in there on this trail here. When we got a west wind or a northwest wind, it'll be fine. And we could even do it with a south wind, or southwest wind. Yeah, we're going crosswind then, but it could even be done with a crosswind. So anyway, what we're going to do, we're going to, 4 of us, whoever wants to take part, 4 of us are going to do a mile-a-day stand hunt through this area. We'll be at it all day, so take a bag lunch, so and extra water, that kind of thing. Yeah, you know, we'll all be using our backpack stools for doing this. And we'll go on this trail and we'll set up along that edge like we're setting up a drive, you know. And each of us will be, maybe 100 yards apart, or about 100 yards apart. You know, the length of a football field. We'll be about that far apart here. We could make it, squeeze it a little more and put 5 guys into it if we wanted to, or even 6 guys, but 4 I think will be okay. And so we'll go out there and we want to be here on this edge 30 minutes before first light, or 1 hour before sunrise, you know, so we get that half hour out of the way. You know, deer over along, that might be along this area, they're going to be kind of curious about, what is that? What's it? Here's something going by there. We're pretty good at moving through the woods, my gang. We know how to walk properly and how to use the wolf roost to get to a stand site. So we'll get up and we'll get there without those deer really knowing whether we're humans or not. We're good at that. So anyway, especially with the wind direction the way it is. So then an hour later, after we get started, we're here. We'll make our first move, and each of us will go about 200 yards. 200 yards. Now, that might mean you're going to have to count your steps. 200 steps about for a grown adult is about 200 yards. So about 200 steps, and we'll all do that at the same time. And we'll go straight there. No stopping and hunting along the way. We're going to go straight to it. I know there's a deer right there, and it's a buck, for heaven's sakes. But we'll sure take advantage of that. But the idea is that we're gonna use the wolf roost, which you've heard a lot about, and I won't go into that now. But the wolf roost, you can move from place to place without alarming deer when you do that. So each of us will go 200 yards, 200 steps, and stop, put our stools on the ground, and preferably where we're kind of hidden, you know, where, you know, there's deep grass here. No, some of these guys will be getting into the deep grass here, and the brush, you know, and they're going to sit down, but sit down where you can see a little bit, but you're well hidden from, you know, above your, about up to your nose, and you're wearing a camel head net, you know, so you're no bare skin showing, so you won't be easily seen, and gloves in your hands, so if it gets up here, you know, like raising a rifle, they won't, you know, be easily seen. So a deer said, what was that? I saw something over there that they would notice. But anyway, we'll sit there for an hour. And then the next hour comes along, another 200 step move, doing the same thing. Every time we make a move, we're going to do it in a way that isn't going to alarm deer. That's important. If anybody that starts stopping and looking around while they're doing that is going to ruin the whole thing. You can't do that, because that is alarming behavior to a deer. If you're stopping a lot and looking around, you're a hunter, you're a wolf or a bear sneaking up on the deer, and oh man, that's scary to them. I don't care what anybody says, when you hunt like that, you're scaring deer. You're not sounding like a deer eating. You aren't fooling them. Okay? So, straight through, 200 step, sit down. And you're sitting there. Now, for the first half hour, you might not see a thing, but if there were deer in this area here, gee, there's something coming, and now it's silent. And, or they might start, they're bedded in there on that grass or wherever, and they're just happy as can be, and so all of a sudden, there's something moved up here. And that's kind of scary. And rather than just take off and start running that way, well, they don't have a reason to run because they're not sure of what they're hearing or seeing. So they'll start moving this way. They don't want to be pushed in that direction. But if something coming toward them, they want to go this way or that way. And then go into the wind after they feel like it's safe enough to get away from the area, so they don't run into an ambush. Older deer, older deer, they know, they just automatic, it's like it's part of their genetics. So like they're born with this, what would you call it? They're born to do that kind of thing. Oh no, I don't want a wolf or a bear or a human chasing me out there. I want to get going into the wind so I can avoid them. So anyway, that's what's going to be happening here now. If there was deer laying in this grass, and well, I think we better move, and they might move up toward this hunter here, or there, or this, any direction. They're going to be moving laterally back and forth. And somebody is going to see a buck and get them, and just keep doing it. It might take half a day, but that's what we're going to do, and that's why we call it mile-a-day still hunting. It'd take you all day to go from here to there, and 200 steps between stand sites, and you sit on your stool and be quiet and watch and listen. And that, especially that second half hour, that's going to be the magic time. And so you're listening, watching, but it could happen anytime. But this is going to move nocturnal deer, and it's going to move them in the way that you don't need standards down there. We aren't driving deer towards standards. Moving this way, they aren't going to go straight ahead. They're going to go this way, back and forth ahead of you. So it really, now this is like wolves do it. You know, wolves band together every fall, usually by the 8th of November, because when they operate as a pack, large numbers of wolves at a pack, they do much better at taking mature whitetails than when they're hunting alone in the summertime. In the summertime, it's just the breeding pair, and the alpha male, the male or female, they hunt alone to bring food back to the pups and they're trade off. But as big and strong and as good hunters as they are, single wolves have an awful hard time taking a deer. But when they form packs and start using cooperative hunting methods, including the one that these wolves used to use years ago, they take deer a lot. It's a lot more effective when they hunt together. Well, us stand hunters are going to do the same thing. We're going to band together, work together like this. This is one of the things we're going to be doing. And when you do that, our odds of taking big bucks will be much better than if we hunted alone. You're just sitting out there in a tree or on the ground. They stand hanging. These nocturnal are stubbornly resistant to move around. But when we make them move this way, we're making them move. The odds of seeing those deer and taking one, whatever kind, are excellent. So that's what we're doing here. So this technique of going through an area like that is really good. Well, let's say it didn't happen today. Well, if they weren't there, let's try this area further west. Tomorrow we'll do the same thing, and this thing extends. It can go quite a ways using this method. So if it doesn't work there, or well, let's try this area. This hillside, or boy, let's do that there. That has always been a good spot too. There's always been deer. This be a likely spot for these doe herds to be moving around. There's feeding areas in there, water, and that kind of thing. That would be a good one. Let's try that one tomorrow. But that is going to be a lot more productive than each one of us going out there and sitting alone for a whole week out there in the woods. We aren't going to be moving any deer. And those deer aren't going to want to move me, because this is one of their really good ways to avoid wolves and man that are hunting. And it's effective for them. When they start doing that, these wolves couldn't reduce their numbers anymore. For 3 years, those 3 per square mile haven't changed. And these wolves are desperately hungry, the ones that are left. And they're running them day and night. And what those does start doing, which helps the bucks as well. But with those started, and they were led by, when does get together, I guess I mentioned, or they get together, they form a pecking order. And generally it's based on which one has lived longer. The ones that know all the tricks of being the leader will become the leader. The ones that know all the tricks about avoiding wolves and humans will be the leader. And you can have a doe 10 years old. Imagine all the experience. She's lived for that long with all these wolves here and these humans that hunt so well. But we don't take does, but she knows how to avoid wolves and humans better than any deer living in the woods, even the older bucks. The older bucks are excellent at age 4.5 to 6.5. They're as good as you can be. That's why you hardly ever see them. But this is what they're doing has really made it difficult. But by doing this cooperative tree stand hunting, group stand hunting, we're going to take deer that we couldn't take otherwise. We just couldn't do it if we did it all individually on our own. So this is one of the methods we're going to use. Mile-a-day stand hunting. It's not aggressive enough to make deer put up their tails and bound away. They're going to stay in here. And we're going to meet some of them in this slow process across, all-day process across. Now, this is the most aggressive of the group methods that we're going to be using. We got some that are even far less aggressive that we'll be talking about in future seminars. Well, we got a bunch of these things to talk about. And the last one, the fourth one I'm going to talk about is the most sophisticated of all methods to hunt whitetails using drive tactics. And it'll probably take me 2 or 3 seminars to cover it all, what we do, what that fourth one is all about. But believe me, group stand hunting with whitetails being as nocturnal as they are, is going to be a lot more effective than the old method we've all been using all these years, sitting in the trees, especially you guys that sit there in one tree for a whole season. My gosh, what a difference this is going to make. It's going to be a lot better than making food plots or using any kind of lure scent, rattling it. It doesn't matter what you try to do to attract deer. They're all smart to that, the older ones to that today because they've been so overused. But this group method is going to make a big difference in your deer hunting in the future. And this is a dandy one. This one, this idea goes way back to 1960, and we've taken quite a few deer with this back in the old days. My brother and I using this hunting method with just 2 of us. So anyway, you get 4, 5, 6 guys going through an area like this, and then maybe take a different mile-long section every day. It doesn't matter where those deer are, you're going to find them doing this. And when you do, you're going to have good hunting. So, that's a lot better way to hunt whitetail, nocturnal deer. It's somewhat aggressive, but not enough to make deer raise their tails and bound away. And that's the difference. So, and that, believe me, I know the difference. I've been through both kinds of hunting for so long, and I remember the old days how it was. I can remember, boy, sometimes when I could be on a stand, this little kid with his shiny new 30-30 Winchester carbine, I'd be standing there, so boom, here goes a deer right by. I didn't even get my gun up and they were gone. And this is terrible. This is a terrible way to hunt. It was terrible for me because I was never good at firing at bounding deer. But boy, my Uncle Jack and a neighbor, a Grant, man, they were so good at it. I just couldn't believe it. So anyway, there you go, guys. Now, soak this one away. Keep this seminar handy come next fall, because you might want to review it again. But this is something that'll work for you. Okay? All right. Now, if you want to learn more about mile-a-day stand, you need this book. You can take this to deer camp even and check on it. Now, all the hunting methods that I've used that have been hybridized with drive techniques are in this book. They aren't hybridized in this book, but those basic methods are all in there, and you need to know that. And so if you haven't got this one yet, before this next hunting season come on, get it. And there's another reason why you need to do that. I'm going to have another new book out soon. And the way things are, you know, with well, prices, everything being up the way they are, book sales haven't been good. Not like they usually are. Gee, I've been selling books since 1980. Every time I come out with a new book, it sells really well. This one did too, but now that everything's so expensive, you know, heating oil, how much it cost me $1,000, over $1,000 now to fill my fuel oil tank. And you know how gas prices are, and even food. It's ridiculous how expensive food is nowadays. And I can understand why people aren't spending money for things they just don't have to have right now. But when this new book comes out, that's going to be #1 priority on printing. It's going to be more important than this book when it comes to that printing. So might be some times this year when this will not be available. Maybe it'll be on back order for a month or something. So keep that in mind. So if you're thinking, oh, I got to get that book someday, I would advise you to get it now, this soon, before we run into that. You know, I'm a small-time publisher, and I can't afford to be making a big printing of 2 books at the same time. It's sad, especially now with inflation the way it is. Everything you do is printing has gone up in price. So keep that in mind. But you don't want to miss having this book. This is a book you're going to really want to have, and if you don't get it, someday you're going to wish, oh, gee, I wish I would have got it when I could. So keep that in mind. Well, anyway, thanks again for watching, and I got a report from YouTube just yesterday, and a number of you have subscribed, and I really appreciate it. That's important to me, and the thumbs up thing, poke that button too. Those are important to me for my future as a seminar speaker. That means everything to anybody on YouTube. Those new subscribers and new thumbs up, you know, things. Those are important, and I appreciate it if you do that. And that doesn't cost. That's free. And so I would appreciate it if you do that as well. So with that, like I said, thanks again for watching, and I hope you're kind of excited about what you learned today, because you should be, because this is your future in whitetail hunting, with global warming happening everywhere and wolves happening in a lot of areas. So this is what you're going to be wanting to do. So anyway, we'll see you again soon. Be sure to visit my website. Here's the link. Here you'll find links to my blog posts, my Twitter account, my YouTube account, my Amazon store with links to my ebooks, my son's eBay store, a money saver if you're ordering from Canada or other countries, my website bookstore, and much more.